It was a new kind of drug designed to treat chronic immune diseases like arthritis and leukemia. But within minutes of being injected with TGN 1412, 6 healthy volunteers were seriously ill with chills, pain and nausea. By that evening, they were in intensive care and relatives were told to expect they might die. The key question is whether anyone could have foreseen the dramatic effects on the volunteers. I've been going through the documents released by the authorities on this drug, trying to piece together what the drug developers knew about the risks, what precautions the US company took to protect the volunteers, and what it was that convinced the British regulators that this trial was safe enough to go ahead. This is the best science can offer to explain what was happening inside the bodies of the trial volunteers. The drug was one of a new class of active molecules called monoclonal antibodies, for which there's great hope. They're powerful and act directly on the immune system. Most are designed to dampen it down, but this one was different. It was the first designed to rev up the immune system. It now seems it went into overdrive, producing what's called cytokine release syndrome, unleashing an overwhelming torrent of chemical messengers. Their immune systems were going haywire. 8 weeks later, and they all appear to be out of danger, but their doctors and their legal teams want to find out if that's going to last. One of the volunteers is still in hospital, but the other 5 affected by this trial are here with their lawyers today. They're having blood tests to see if there are likely to be any long-term effects on their immune systems. The volunteers are still wary of journalists after the media maelstrom that followed the trial disaster, but one of them did agree to be filmed. Nav Modi has just completed an MBA and had been working in a temporary job before the trial put all that on hold.
Just trying to cope up with things like not yet fully recovered. I do have problems like I just recently had hay fever symptoms and I'm still on medicines. Just trying to cope up with things and trying my best to get back to work as soon as possible.
Clinical immunologist Professor Richard Powell is working for the legal teams representing the volunteers.
Clearly these guys were not just sick, some of them were on death's door. So this cytokine release syndrome was like a tsunami going through their bodies, if you like, and will have had dramatic effects.
So what did Tegenero, the drug company that made TGN 1412, know about the risk of cytokine release? And did it really come completely out of the blue? The company's own brochure discusses the risk of what it calls a cytokine storm. It even describes the need for appropriate countermeasures. Outside immunologists say that should have rung alarm bells.
I think it could have been foreseen. I think this antibody is novel and different. The published literature on it says it's this sort of super stimulating antibody, and if you stimulate the immune system hard, then you get a cytokine release syndrome. It is almost as simple as that.
Other immunologists I've spoken to have similar views. One said the very action of this drug meant losing all the controls on the immune system. He said if someone had come to him and said, "This is what I want to try," he would have told them that's crazy. And he wasn't alone.
I guess you would say the effects were unpredicted because when the antibody was tested in the animal models, it showed no serious side effects. Whether they were unpredictable is a different question. And I think if you look at the basic science underlying the activation of the T cells, then you would predict the effects.
We went to Germany to put all these points to Tegenero in their first extended interview about the trial. So the company that developed the drug has agreed to talk to us, but they didn't want to meet at their offices. So this is the venue they've chosen. Yeah, I mean, in fact, 2 or 3 people have said to me Thomas Henke is one of the scientists who developed the drug at Tejanero, a small biotech company with a grand name, which he told us comes from the Spanish "I create you." What was your reaction when you first heard that these 6 young people were in a life-threatening situation?
Oh, I was, and we all at Tejanero were devastated. This was completely unexpected, and our thoughts have been with the volunteers and their families ever since then.
Do you feel responsible?
Well, I feel devastated.
But did you feel that it was your fault?
This was a completely unexpected reaction, and therefore I'm completely devastated about what had happened, but it was not predictable.
So they're sticking to their line, conducting an internal inquiry and still very wary of outside attention. We went and had a look at their offices, out of sight in an anonymous building near Frankfurt. As a one-product spin-off from the local university, their future depended on the success or failure of TGN 1412. Can I put to you some of the other comments that people have made? One expert who's an expert on the immune system said that he thought it was very unwise to go ahead with this trial. It was obvious to him, he said, that the immune system would go haywire using this drug. Why wasn't that obvious to you?
I don't know the expert you talk about, but certainly did not have the same preclinical evidence that we did in our hands.
Why should there be such a disparity of view then? For example, one said if someone had come to me and said, this is what I want to try, I would have said, that is crazy.
Well, I think there's also other opinions among the immunologists. And I think this really highlights that this is probably, in hindsight, to be evaluated differently. But at the time when we applied for the trial, all the evidence that we had in place, including considerations about the mode of action of the drug, did not point towards an interpretation that this was an unsafe thing to do.
Tejanero contracted out the trial to a US company called ParExcel. The ParExcel unit is based here at London's Northwick Park Hospital, but it's run as an entirely separate entity. Tejanero and ParExcel designed the trial between them, but there are questions about how well prepared the ParExcel team was to deal with any serious side effects in the volunteers. We've established that ParExcel will be the focus of the legal team's fight, and we've learned that's because, for whatever reason, it was several hours before the volunteers were given the steroid treatment that could have helped tackle their massive immune reaction. And there's another concern over the fact that all 6 were given the drug within minutes of each other. One volunteer told us those injected first were falling ill even as the others were lined up to receive the drug. Patrick Vallance has just been made head of drug discovery at GlaxoSmithKline, but he spoke to us as chair of a professional working group that investigated the trial.
With a new antibody treatment, because of the uncertainty, our group felt very strongly that you should go in with a single dose to a single person, watch and wait, and then when you know there hasn't been some reaction, and we're particularly, of course, thinking about catastrophic reactions as occurred here, you then go in the following day or at a reasonable time interval with the second dose.
So if the scientists could see the risks, how clearly were those risks conveyed to the volunteers themselves by Tejanero and ParExcel? This is the consent form given to the volunteers. It's not been made public, but we have a copy. And under the possible side effects, it does talk about cytokine release, saying this could cause a hives-like allergic reaction.
I think there was in fact some muddled thinking. Hives, which is nettle rash, comes under lots of names, occurs because there's an allergic reaction to the drug that's been given, or the monoclonal antibody in this case that's been given. The cytokine release syndrome is a very separate thing and can have the dramatic consequences that happened in these people.
ParExcel has declined an interview with Newsnight and refused to answer written questions. But on the issue of the consent form, they drew our attention to the fact that it was approved by a British ethics committee. So,
How many members are there in the...
They mean the Brent Ethics Committee, an elusive group of volunteers led by Cathy Vickery. It took us 2 weeks of phone calls and emails to persuade her to face questions for the first time about the committee's role in clearing the trial alongside the regulator, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA.
The MHRA, in their report, describes the role of the Ethics Committee as being to protect the rights, dignity and well-being of the research participants. To somebody from the outside, it would look as if you didn't do that. Are you satisfied that you did fulfil that role?
What happened was entirely unexpected from all the information that was available to the Ethics Committee to happen to one individual, let alone 6.
She appears to believe that for them, that's the end of the story. But for the volunteers she was supposed to be protecting, it's not over.
The treatment they had, they recognised it, they treated it appropriately.
We went back to see Richard Powell, who's been analysing their blood tests. It's possible they could face multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis or even cancer. Of course, their early results are not public, but we've been allowed to see them.
From what you've seen so far, do these people have normal immune systems?
No.
And would you expect over time that their immune systems will recover or maybe not?
I think their immune systems will come back towards normal, but the real question is will they become normal again? And that is incredibly difficult to answer.
In the end, it's with the government's regulators, the MHRA, that the buck must stop. Since last autumn, the agency's been reorganising itself.
The agency says it had access to expert opinion throughout its reorganisation, but we've established that not only was the drug assessed and approved over the space of just 17 days in January, but during that time it was seen only by internal staff at the MHRA. They consulted none of the expert advisors available to them.
Professor Joe Collier was a member of the MHRA's own Medicines Commission until October of last year.
We know this drug was new, it worked in a novel way, it couldn't be tested thoroughly in animals, and the risks were enormous if things went wrong. The MHRA should have recognised that they were out of their depth in these particular circumstances, and they should have sought advice from others who were professionally involved in this sort of thing clinically. They failed to do that, and they've let volunteers down.
There is going to be a Department of Health expert review, but chaired by one of the MHRA's own senior scientific advisors. So is that enough? The MHRA has published its documents after Freedom of Information requests, but kept key sections secret, claiming commercial confidentiality. Unless those sections are now released in full, science and the rest of us can't hope to find out all of what went wrong. And there's every chance that this will happen again.